an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Obelisk Gate, chapters 14, 15, and 16. Oh, and just 16. I really do need to get a handle on what chapters I've read before I start my intros, everybody. In these chapters, Nassun kills a bunch of people and feels like she definitely did the right thing when she did it, and yikes though. And also, it turns out that some outside force of a large number of people has figured out where the calm that Essun is in is. And that just feels like they haven't found it exactly. Not where to get in, I don't think. But they know it's there. Everything is looking very dangerous right now. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. So I want to thank Jason Bruff for commissioning this episode. I don't remember if I mentioned this on the last Broken Earth episode, but the last episode that Jason commissioned was a bit over a month ago, and he joined me for it, but he was very quiet a lot of it, and you probably remember me mentioning that he was in the chat. Later on that evening, he laid down to take a nap because he wasn't feeling well, and he did not wake up. And I just really, it's always very surreal as somebody who grows pretty close to her supporters, when somebody that I feel like I've gotten to know better than a lot of them passes away, because I feel like I should be informed of it when it happens, but there's no reason for anyone to know about the relationship that I had with a person that was very virtual. And it's always a shock because, of course, there's just a constancy around the way we see the world, but especially the way we see our online friends. And it was just a really huge bummer. I apparently Jason had an illness that was low lying that he was dealing with, but it was something that it was still pretty unexpected for him to pass away like this. So I just wanted to mention that he has commissioned this episode, and there is another one coming up also under his name, and how much I appreciate that even after he's gone, he's still part of Unspoiled. There's something really sort of poignant about that. And I really appreciate that when I made the announcement in the patrons group, because he was active there were a lot of people who came out of the woodwork and were like, him and I used to message back and forth all the time. And Jason used to message the Unspoiled page a lot. And when I found out how many other people he was messaging with, I just was like, what did he do all day if he was messaging all of us? He just had the most active online social life. So I know that there were a lot of people who also felt like they had gotten to know him, and it was just quite a shock. And he was a big cheerleader for the show. I saw him in different groups tagging the main page, being like, you should listen to this if you like this, blah, blah, blah. And just always really trying to get more listeners for me in a way that is pretty rare. I have a few listeners who do that very frequently, and they're serious about it. And I just so appreciate it, because that is one of the like more underrated but more effective ways of getting new people, is to just have a listener who loves you, who just talks about you to everybody. So I just wanted to start this episode out by thanking Jason for not only contributing to Spoil Me and commissioning these specific episodes, but probably being responsible for some other listeners finding me also. So, you know, I feel like that is a nice testament to who he was and how supportive a person he seemed to be for so many people. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that here because this was specifically commissioned by him. And he apparently had very good taste, because this book is excellent. And poor Owen came into my office earlier and was alarmed to find me in my reading chair, curled over my Kindle, crying, because I just cry reading this book pretty much every time. So, okay, let's get started. Chapter 14 is titled, You're Invited. This chapter is right after the interlude which we get from Hoa's perspective. So we are with Nassun, or not with Nassun, I'm sorry, with Essun. And she is kind of telling us what it was like for Tonki to recover after her arm was cut off using the orogenes that she managed to bring to a fine bladed precision. And it turns out that Tonki gets an infection, and she manages to overcome it and survive, but it causes some sort of nerve damage, and that's probably not going to go away. And she tries to kind of cop an attitude with Essun sometimes about the fact that she chopped her arm off, to which Essun is just you fucking grabbed up a piece of pure hate that you didn't know what it did and tried to run. Your fault, not mine. So just deal with that. Lerna forgives you for being a monster. That's not exactly it. You and he still can't talk about Tirimo easily. Still, he heard your raging fight with Yika all through the surgery that he performed on Tonki's arm, and that means something to him. Yika wanted Tonki left to die on the table. You argued for her life and won. Lerna knows now that there's more to you than death. You're not sure you agree with that assessment, but it's a relief to have something of your old friendship back. So, I would like to register my appreciation for the fact that so often, and it's understandable why, but so often in fiction, when there is a sort of battle of wills between doing what is humane or compassionate and doing what is brutally efficient and practical to a point of being near almost like a crime against humanity. Almost every time the dude is the one who is trying to be super efficient and for the greater good. And it's the woman who is really endorsing, but these are people and we need to care about them, and what will society be if this is all we care about, and blah, blah, blah. And I really like the fact that in this, Ika is the one that keeps on just being oh my God, I hope this useless person who doesn't contribute at anything dies soon. And instead, it's Lerna who keeps on being dude, what the fuck is wrong with you? And being very sort of sensitive, which Ika does not really respect. They don't really seem to like each other very much, which of course you probably wouldn't. So it's nice to see a woman in that role, even though I do understand why it tends to be men who are relegated to that role in a lot of fiction, because oftentimes it's men who try and cut off their actions from their emotions and consider that to be an advantage and a good thing. But the funny thing about it is that I don't even feel like Ika's trying to cut herself off from her emotions. I feel like this is genuinely how she is. Like, she's not playing at anything here. She really believes that this is the best thing for the community. And it's really tough to argue with somebody who truly buys into what they are arguing for in a way that's uncompromising and absolutely sincere. I really have a love-hate relationship with this sort of thinking, because I used to be a lot more like Ika, where I was just like, yeah, people are going to die because we don't have enough for everyone. And that's just kind of how it has to be. We can't sustain a growing population of all, healthy, provided for human beings without any sort of loss, and expect that to be a sustainable way to, inhabit this planet. And in an absolutist way, that is certainly true. But I had, and this, when I'm saying that I used to believe this, I'm talking about in my early 20s, we're talking over 10 years ago at this point. How I actually took a quiz about what my political leanings were at that time, and I got libertarian, because I really felt like everybody really should be responsible for themselves. And I didn't understand that the being responsible for yourself is a lovely idea if everybody is given the same resources and the same power. But I didn't understand at the time how completely uneven everything is, and that providing for people who have, a bunch of disadvantages that they have to fight against every day, giving them more and assisting them more to compensate for the fact that they have to fight harder for a lot of other things, is just the smart and fair thing to do. And regarding Yika, the thing with her is that they are obviously in a very different situation in this calm during a season than we are as human beings right now in the world, when I was making my flagrant declarations that, some people dying is actually a good thing. And when Ika says it, it's a much more concentrated idea. She isn't talking about the grand scheme of the entire population of the world. She's talking about maybe 100 people in this comm, right? I don't know if we ever get a specific number, but I feel like it's around there. It might be higher. But so while I look back on the mentality that I used to have with straight up derision, and I'm just like, oh my God, I was such an idiot. And I really thought that I had cornered the market on logic, and I was fucking stupid. When I see Ika's perspective applied here specifically, it makes more sense. However, it is the sort of thing where I understand the slippery slope argument, where you say okay, you feel like it's justifiable to make that kind of argument right now because of where we are and what the community has at its disposal in terms of resources and space. But when is the moment that we are officially out of the woods and can comfortably provide for and protect people who don't contribute a lot to the community? Who determines where that line is, and when do we say, okay, now you're acceptable to us, And that's something I think that as a society worldwide, we have not really recognized that we should be at that point by now. Especially in the United States, productivity and sort of compensating for your existence using productivity as a measure for your worth as a person is absolutely still the order of the day. There is a firmly held belief by many people that you should not get something for nothing, that you should work for what you have, because if you don't work, you will not value what you have the way that you would otherwise. And there is, of course, an assumption also, if you do not work and you are provided something, there is someone else who is working to give that to you, whom you are taking advantage of. Now, what's interesting about that is that if you were talking about actual, man-made material objects, for example, if somebody were given a home that was built by people who were not paid for their work, then maybe. But what people like me, socialists, in other words, are advocating is simply for those who are so mind-bogglingly wealthy that they could literally end poverty in the country across the board as we know it. We want them to do what they should fucking want to do as a human being in the first place, which is make the lives of everybody around them who is struggling easier, because we have reached a point in society where we don't need to constantly struggle in order to provide food for people. We have enough food to go around and throw so much of it away that it's obscene. We have houses and apartments standing empty because people can't afford to live there, and meanwhile somebody is asleep on the street because you've decided you value getting paid the rent you want more than you value that person's life who is asleep on a sidewalk in the middle of winter. And I can't help but laugh whenever I watch like science fiction at this point in my life. And so much of like the discoveries that are made in science fiction books, TV shows, and movies are about like, oh, we can end cancer as we know it. And we can, imagine having everything we need and not having to. And we are there right now, at least in terms of resources and having enough to go around. But we put the profit from those products ahead of the well-being of people. And in these fictional universes that I read and watch, there is an assumption that whatever technology has been discovered or whatever advancement in science has been discovered will simply be given away for free to the masses to improve society as a whole. Where in our current capitalist society, that is simply not how it works, and that is not how people think. And everybody is accepting of that sort of ideology in fiction. But when it comes to actually putting it into practice and giving people those resources for free because it would be good for the world, it's not even considered because, well, what did they do to earn that and deserve that? And it's real, like, so many of the advancements that we have made technologically is in the last 100 years have supposedly been to make life easier. And then when people's jobs are replaced by that technology because it is easier, because that's what we intended, we decide, well, now we have to figure out something else for those people to do. We don't tell ourselves, oh, good, we don't have to worry about this silly chore anymore. We can put that effort towards art. We can put that effort towards caring for the elderly or disabled or education or anything. We don't do that. We have such an impossible time getting our head out of the productivity equals value headspace that we simply find some other meaningless job that we have decided they need to do in order to justify having help from anyone or not having help at all and simply making a minimum wage paycheck. So I have a real problem with the mindset that Ika is displaying. It makes so much sense in the moment, and it's really easy to get carried away and continue thinking and feeling like this when the danger has passed and people will internalize their worth here and continue to carry that with them even once we're out of the emergency red zone. Now, obviously, the season that is upon them at this moment is meant to last longer than any of these people's lives. So in this particular situation, again, it's not really relevant for me to talk about, well, what about society as a whole? Because they will be in an emergency situation for centuries based on what Essun is feeling and sessing about the season. But nevertheless, I feel like it's an interesting philosophical point. When are we out of the woods, and who decides that? And what happens to those who have their psyche's kind of damaged by being told that they are only worth whatever they can do for people versus having inherent worth as human beings and living conscious creatures. And it's tough, you know, like, I don't know. I find this to be, because of the progression that I have made in the last 10 years of understanding and realizing my own mistakes in the way that I used to think. I always zero in on these sorts of questions really finely because I want to know what the author thinks and what sort of, like, how much they understand the original argument and where they are now with thinking it through. Because there's a moment, like, Ika starts to court Tunki and, Zharka, sorry, not Ika. Zharka, starts courting Tunki, and at one point, I think when they're hanging out with, Tunki, and Ika mentions to Tunki, like, I don't think that you are as valuable to the comm as the Strongbacks are. And I don't know how that just, like, comes up in conversation, but apparently it did. And this has caused Tunki to want to prove herself. And, like, I'm not mad at that in the abstract, but it does feel, like, pretty tough to just be like, well, you know, if you died, it wouldn't really be as much of a loss as somebody else. Like, that's basically what she's saying, you know? And so Tunki decides to, like, prove herself by doing a sort of a study about where the nutritional values and what kind of necessity the people in the comm have. And she has figured out that unless they find some, like, really sustainable source of animal protein, the people in this comm are going to start showing basically what amounts to, like, a B12 deficiency in about a year. And this is something that, like, a lot of vegans will know what this is about. If you don't have animal products, then you need to get your B12 from another source. So most vegans have to take a B12 supplement, depending on how strict they are with their diet in the first place. They have to take a B12 supplement in order to not suffer this kind of fate. And that's part of what is held up these days as, like, proof that the vegan diet is not healthy. The fact that you absolutely have to supplement with this external thing. But then there are vegans who are like, yeah, but we live in a society in which this supplement is readily available and we should evolve now to doing things differently because we can. And it's, you know, I fall more on the, if you absolutely need a supplement for this diet to work, it feels like it's not a great idea. But I also understand the concerns about the well-being of animals and all of that and the, you know, toll that it takes on the earth. Anyway, so they all are, like, low-key aware before Tunki even brings this up that this is a potential problem, but they just don't really want to look at it. And there isn't much to be done about it that they haven't been trying to do already. So this doesn't work out for Tunki in terms of proving her worth to Ika the way that she wanted. But Essun recognizes what it was that Tunki was trying to do and that it has its own value, even though it's very inconvenient and not something that anybody wants to hear. And she thanks her for it. She's the only one. It says, you shunt the orogene children's lessons to Tamel and another adult orogene in the comm. The children complain that he's not very good, none of your finesse, and while he goes easier on them, they're not learning as much. It's nice to be appreciated, if after the fact. You start training Cutter as an alternative after he asks you to show him how you cut off Tunki's arm. You doubt he'll ever perceive magic or move obelisks, but he's at least first ring level, and you want to see if you can make him a 2 or 3 ringer just because. So, there's a point where, like, Essun is trying to bargain with Ika to find out how Ika does some of what she does. And Ika just kind of is like, no, I have to keep my tricks to myself. And sort of tries to act as if it's like a joke and like teasing, but you can tell it's most definitely not. Ika isn't a joking, teasing type, let's be honest. An all-volunteer trading party goes north to try to reach the calm of Tetahi. They do not return. Ika nixes all future attempts, and you do not protest this. One of your former orogenes students was in the missing party. Castrima thrives in those 6 months. One woman gets pregnant without permission, which is a big problem. So this is really crazy, because they all have to debate what they're going to do about this pregnancy. It's interesting because, like, having an abortion is not even mentioned as an option here. And I'm not sure if that's because they don't believe this, or if it's because they don't have the resources to successfully carry one out, or if, I'm curious what their attitude is towards abortion in a situation like this, where caring for a child drains resources and time and energy, and they don't necessarily have that to spare. But there's 2 things that come out of it. First of all, Ika and Essun get into like a screaming fight because Ika offhandedly says that she kind of hopes Alabaster will die soon and make up for this baby. And Essun manages to have a screaming, raging fight with Ika, but not cause any tremors at all. Her control of her orogeny during this is absolute. And there were so many people who have been mistrustful of her temper and what happened at Terimo, that this proves to them they don't really need to worry about her, even when she's at her most emotional. So then, based on the favorable recent genealogy, let's see, they contribute one of their child allocations to the family. Oh, that's right. Here it is. The breeders decide to speak up for the new baby. With the stipulation that it will have to join their use caste if it is born perfect. That's not so terrible a price to pay, they say, spending one's reproductive years cranking out children for common caste in exchange for the right to be born. The mother agrees. Which, like, that is bonkers. I just don't understand this caste system in general. I kind of want a little bit more information about it. Like, it's pretty self-explanatory to a degree with the breeders, but I just really would love to know the history of where these castes came from and exactly how people are picked, because the strongbacks, I am not under the impression that they don't breed, but the breeders, that's like their entire job, right? But do they also, like, is there also labor there? And how does it go with, like, obviously women who are pregnant are going to be way less physically productive than men who are, so are breeders all women? Like, I really want to know a little bit more about how all this works and who's where and how that's determined and whatever. And Ika hasn't talked to the community at large about the protein situation, because at this point there's nothing to be done about it and there's no point creating a panic. And a male breeder. Oh, okay. I had asked about if they are just women, but here's a male breeder. He's very interested to know that you've borne 3 healthy children, all powerful orogenes. He flatters you by talking about how tall and strong you are, how well you weathered months on the road with only travel rations to eat, and hinting that you're only 43. This actually makes you laugh. You feel as old as the world, and this pretty fool thinks you're ready to crank out another baby. You turn down his tacit offer with a smile, but it's strange having that conversation with him, unpleasantly familiar. When the breeder is gone, you think of Corundum and wake Tonki by throwing a cup at the wall and screaming at the top of your lungs. Yeah, yikes. Like, this sort of thing being so triggering is, I feel like this is a really lovely example of what it's like to get older, and people laugh at the idea of triggers, but it's only ignorant people who don't get it laugh, because this is a very real thing. And as you get older, you accumulate more triggers because you experience more and you go through usually more trauma. And it will become a little alarming how many very small things carry this heavy weight and meaning behind them that they didn't used to. And it's not something you can really mentally prepare yourself for a lot of the time. You don't realize that meaning is there until you are in the middle of a meltdown over it. And so for some people, they know what triggers them and they are able to sort of like look for or be prepared for those triggers and avoid them if they can, because they can sense the signs around it. But there are a lot of us who have not got the vocabulary or the introspection to really nail down what they are, and this will happen, just a screaming fit of breaking things in response to somebody just kind of talking to you about having kids, and it just feels like it shouldn't be this big a deal, but when you've lived through certain things, there it is. Alabaster suffers another bad infection during these 6 months. He survives it only by deliberately stoning what's left of his legs. This self-induced surgery so stresses his body that his few bouts of lucid time shrink to a half-hour apiece, interspersed with long stretches of stupor or fitful sleeping. He's so weak when he's awake that you have to strain to hear him, though thankfully this improves over the course of a few weeks. You're making progress, connecting easily now to the newly arrived Topaz, and beginning to understand what he did to transform the spinel into the knife-like weapon he keeps nearby. The obelisks are conduits. You flow through them, flow with them, as the magic flows. Resist and die, but resonate finely enough, and many things become possible. And it's just very compelling that Essun is figuring all of this out at the same time that Nassun is. We will talk about Nassun's thoughts about her mother a little later. However, as much as Essun is making progress with working with these obelisks, she is not doing it fast enough, considering how much Alabaster is like on the edge. But it does give her something to really focus her energy on, and having a purpose really helps with like giving meaning and a drive to your life. So in that sense, Essun has something to aim for, even though the pressure is so intense that she winds up breaking down and crying a few times. And then it says, and then Hoa returns. It happens on a day of sorrows and lace. The sorrow is because more hunters have died. In the middle of bringing back a rare hunting kill, a bear that was visibly too thin to safely hibernate, easy to shoot in its desperate aggression, the party was attacked in turn. 3 hunters died in a barrage of arrows and crossbow bolts. The 2 surviving hunters did not see their assailants. The projectiles seemed to come from all directions. So they run and eventually try and circle back to see if the bear and the bodies have been left behind. And shockingly, it has been. They assumed that these people were like trying to get at them to take their kill, but it's been left, and there's a stick planted in the ground with like a strip of cloth wrapped around it. And there's something clearly like inside this strip of cloth, and they bring it back into the camp, into the comm. And Ika unwraps it, even though there is some danger to that because they don't know what's inside. And when she opens it, there is a note on a piece of hide that says, "Welcome to Renanis." I have to admit, when I read this, I did not understand the significance or the reactions of the people reading it. I was like, they are taking this as an assertion that the people who left this note are part of Renanis, that Renanis is like, the town has actually survived, when all of them seem to have assumed that Renanis is like either abandoned or just like an informal, smaller group of people, and that this is like, and like this is evidence that these people know that the community is here, which is supposed to be secret. And they like talk this through, and I guess it's just that anyone knowing they're here is potentially a huge problem. But I just felt like it was a lot of assumption to just decide that this means that they know where the calm is. Like later on, we find out that this is kind of true, but they don't know that from this. And it felt like they were just jumping to a lot of conclusions. So at this point, Essun is like, you know what? I need to see if I can do what Alabaster has said he can do, because he has mentioned being able to like follow and watch and listen through, or not watch and listen through walls. And when he had mentioned that so long ago, it felt like it was so far beyond anything that Essun was able to do that it was almost a superpower akin to like miraculous intervention. But now Essun understands better that there is a tapping into a whole separate entity, for lack of a better word, that allows orogenes to do things completely outside of what, or like the original teachings have restricted them to. So she decides to try and like go into it and see what she can see. And the first time Jarka like interrupts her and she just gets very irritated. And Yika is just like, dude, you need to not fucking startle an orogene when they're in the middle of doing whatever it was she was doing, because that could kill everybody. So be fucking careful. So she goes back into it. And she does it using the topaz at this point. Evil Earth. Alabaster isn't just assessing half the continent. He's using the spinel to do it. You haven't even thought about using an obelisk to extend your reach, but he does it like breathing. No one touch me, you say softly. No one speak to me. Without waiting to see if they understand, you plunge into the obelisk. You're in the topaz, stretching yourself across the world in a breath. No need to be in the ground when the topaz is in the air, is the air. It exists in a state of being that transcends solidity, and thus you are capable of transcending too. You become air. You drift amid the ash clouds and see the stillness track beneath you in humps of topography and patches of dying forest and threads of roads, all of it grayed over after the long month of the season. And you launch yourself northward, and then you stutter to a halt, because there is something much closer than the equator that draws your attention. It is so shocking that you fall out of alignment with the topaz at once, and you are very lucky. There is a struck glass instant in which you feel the shivering immensity of the obelisk's power, and you know that you survive only because of fortunate resonances and careful, long-dead designers who obviously planned for mistakes like yours. And then you are gasping and back within yourself and babbling before you quite remember what words mean. Camp, fire, you say, panting a little. Basin. Yika gets it instantly, sitting up straight and tightening her jaw. There's a rusting army in the forest basin. I could assess their campfires. How many? Maybe 100? Tetahi, Cutter breathes, sitting back. He's gone paler than usual. So you've heard nothing from Tetahi in months, and the trading party you sent past the Warnoff failed to return. This army must have hit Tetahi around that time, then bunkered down there for a while, sending out scouting parties to mark territory, replenishing stores, rebuilding arms, healing their wounded, maybe sending some of their spoils back north to Renanis. Now that they've digested Tetahi, they're on the march again, and somehow they know Kastrima's here. They're saying hello. Again, not 100% sure why where they've camped determines that they know Kastrima is here. It's a basin that feels like a spot that people are going to camp out in. It's just like, I'm not doubting what these characters are thinking, because they are very experienced and all sort of leaping to the same conclusions at the same time. But I have to be honest that I am not on the same page with them. And this happens in these books occasionally. It feels like there is an understanding amongst the characters that I am supposed to be like really on board with and also connecting the same dots, and I'm not. And I can't tell if it's because I'm dense, if the writing is that opaque at times, because this is not an author that explains things to her audience. This is an author who expects you to fucking pay attention and keep up. And honestly, it's a really interesting experience to come across a book that expects that of you. And for me to cover it the way that I do when I'm covering these chapters, I'm 100% invested and doing it very slowly and talking about everything in such great detail. And yet I still am not keeping up. And I'm not really sure like what that says about the writing or about me as a reader, but I'd be very interested to hear from all of you who have read these books to see if you got the same conclusions when reading this as the characters are getting. Am I just being dense and not really understanding it, or is this like a surprise for readers as well? And is it supposed to be? Because this is just something that I'm not feeling very confident on how I'm reading it. If this is like, there are times where I'm like, okay, this clearly did not work and the author doesn't realize, but I'm not sure if I'm an outlier here or not. So they raise an alarm to get everybody together to talk about what's going on. And Ika tells everybody, and everyone sort of like keeps calmer than Essun is expecting. Like she sort of thinks that there's going to be this blind panic, and there eventually does reach a point where people start to panic more. But initially they are managing to keep themselves like fairly calm and ready to talk about this. And they are talking about whether or not they can fight back and whether they even have the option to not do it. Do we have time to send a messenger to one of our allied comms? Lerna asked. Would any of them be willing to help us? To which everybody is just sort of like looking at Lerna like, oh, you sweet summer child. Because again, it's a season. It's every man for themselves, every comm for themselves. People are not going to be out here fighting a battle on behalf of another group of people when they themselves are struggling and possibly going to be facing down this exact same enemy themselves a little bit down the line. And it's they could be here in days, says someone, voice high-pitched with alarm. And you get up intending to move to the center of the gathering to try and add your voice in calling for calm, but you stop because someone is standing in the place you intended to move to. It's not like with Antimony or Ruby Hair or the other Stone Eaters you've glimpsed. Those, for whatever reason, don't like to be seen moving. You'll catch a blur now and again, but then the statue is there watching you, as if there has always been a statue of a stranger in that position sculpted by someone long ago. So what's going on here is very confusing to me, and I'm going to be honest with you all. I don't understand the Stone Eaters in general. I'm feeling pretty good about what certain things symbolize and what certain populations symbolize within this story. But the Stone Eaters are a real outlier whose motives and way of life and creation, it feels like I am missing something. And I felt this a little while ago. There was a chapter in which it said, I'm sure that you can predict one of the things that happened. And it mentions that a Stone Eater like turns its attention. I believe it's to Nassun in response to her turning that boy into stone. And the author wrote it as if I should get that that's what's happened. But I do not. And I'm not sure if the implication is supposed to be that Nassun turning a person into stone is the like first step in creating a Stone Eater. If these were created by orogenes, if these used to be regular people, or what? I don't think so, but there's something like I'm missing there if the author thinks that I should have known that was going to be the reaction of a Stone Eater. I mean, we have Alabaster himself turning to stone slowly. And the other Stone Eater is just consuming him. He is not turning into one of them. He is turning into food for them. So I am not totally sure what this is supposed to be. Like the Stone Eaters, when it says Stone Eater, it doesn't mean any old stone, because clearly later on when the thing happens with Hoa and Essun is feeding him the stones that he's been carrying around with him, which are his food, that is a specific source that is finite that he is worried about losing. He doesn't want to eat it all because he thinks there might be a need for it later. And that tells me that they don't just eat any stone. It's specific stone. So is what these Stone Eaters eat only stone that used to be a person? Is that how that works? And the attention that Nassun got from a Stone Eater from far away that senses what she just did, is it because there's so few food sources that anytime a new one turns up, it's kind of like a big deal? I really don't understand. And this Stone Eater is holding a torn off arm, and it's Hoa's arm. It is weird to me that Hoa can bleed. I had no idea that Stone Eaters bled. And it feels like that's not necessarily always the case, because at one point, Essun slices off this Stone Eater's hand, and it doesn't sound like there's blood happening there. It's blood, like it says that the blood is smeared, that there's blood that's dripped, it's talked about as if it is a liquid, but the bones are diamond, I think, something faceted. So their insides are still very different, but the fact that there's like actual blood, I was completely floored by that. It never even occurred to me that they had liquid blood in their bodies that could leak out or spill or do whatever our blood does. Excuse me. So this guy says that he's from Renanis and says, "We wish you no harm." And they're like, "Yeah, you're literally carrying somebody's arm. So why would we believe that?" I mean, sure, it's not a human arm, but nevertheless, he says, "We have plentiful food, strong walls, all yours if you choose to join our calm." And when they're like, "Well, maybe we don't want to," he's like, "Well, in a year, you're going to be eating each other. And I think you know that. So I don't really know what you have to lose here." And Cutter asks whether or not they would all be in their same use castes and whether they would be actually adopted into the calm. Basically, he's like, "Are we going to be your equals, or are we going to be prisoners and slaves?" And Ika is like, "That is a stupid question. If I were these people, I would just fucking lie. Why should we believe whatever answer he gives us?" And he says, "We don't have to lie. But we have no use for orogenes." So again, we have no use for orogenes. What's the deal with a Stone Eater saying this? I do not understand their relationship to one another in the world. So I just really don't understand what it is that's like his goal or what they get from one another. But he basically makes it seem like, if you guys want to join us because you'll die otherwise, you're going to have to get rid of all of the orogenes, which is like a really horrific ultimatum to drop in the middle of the community in general, because not only will that be pitting the stills against the orogenes, but it will also cause probably some sort of catastrophe. If the orogenes try and fight back and go overboard, everybody could die. So the whole, just saying that is there's just a lot implied by doing that. And at this point, Essun busts in and says, "Where's Hoa?" And he says, "Dead," after leading us here. And Essun says, "You're lying," and Schlink chops his hand off, the hand that's holding Hoa's arm. And again, it says there is no blood. Hoa's arm hits the crystal with a loud, meaty thud. It's heavier than it looks. And the Stone Eater's hand makes a second, even more solid clack, separating from the arm. The cross-section of its wrist is an undifferentiated gray. So I have no clue. Is Hoa trying to be more, like, it says hits with a meaty thud, which does not sound like stone. So is he made of different stuff than this Stone Eater is? Like, what the fuck is going on? And he's able to like summon back his wrist and reassemble it. And Essun says, "Get out before I chop you into more pieces than you can put back together." And he smiles. And it's not like a smile, like a threatening smile. It's a smile like he's actually kind of delighted by this. And again, I do not understand the implications of that look or reaction. So she runs back, as soon does, to her room, and she finds Hoa fucked up. His like lower jaw is torn off. Both of his arms are missing. Like, he is fucked up. And I say you because of course it's written that way. She goes and picks up the bag of his food, his stone food, and shoves it down his throat. And this results in him basically getting surrounded by so many silver tendrils that it almost frightens Essun. She backs up, and this solidifies into essentially a stone egg. And he sort of like cooks in this egg and eventually hatches out of it. And the hatching is so hot, it actually burns everything in the room. So Essun had like grabbed her bag and pulled that out of there before this happened. And it turns out to be like really lucky because everything else is totally destroyed. And what rises from the split in the geode, moving too human smoothly at first, but rapidly readjusting to a familiar sort of punctuated stillness, is the Stone Eater from the Garnet Obelisk. Hello again. So I don't know what this is. Like the Stone Eater from the Garnet Obelisk that she got in tune with that seemed to be dead. The one that she was able to like burn down all of Atia or whatever, Alia. Is that the one? So we get a little piece of of stone lore where they're talking about reaching the conclusion that orogenes are inferior and need to be run by regular human beings. And then we get Nassun in rejection. And Nassun is at the fulcrum, the Antarctic fulcrum, with Shafa. And I'm so sorry about how much time I've gone through, guys, without even getting to this chapter. But Nassun, this is intense, guys. Nassun is... it says she sits in an office within the Antarctic fulcrum, suddenly understanding her mother better than ever before. So this is a really interesting sort of, what I imagine here is Nassun being the equivalent of a black person who grew up like outside of like a sort of understanding of where respectability politics comes from. And then actually seeing in action the way that it is instilled in people and realizing like why her mother reacted to her and tried to teach her in the way that she did because of this like fucked up understanding of her place in the world and the punishments that she could receive if she didn't comport herself in a certain way. And there are only orogenes here. There are no guardians. And the talk at first, which seems like peaceful, between the orogenes that are in charge, the imperial orogenes, and the two guardians that are with them, Shafa and Umber, is laced with a lot of like implied threats and lies. They try and say like that the guardians that they had died trying to protect them, which is so clearly a lie. And I am dying to know how they did lie. Like, what exactly, how did these guardians wind up dying Could they be killed by orogenes? Is that possible? I kind of had been under the impression that guardians were like impervious to what orogenes can do, but I don't know. At one point when they finally, like, eventually both Shafa and Umber attack, these people have this reaction. One of them says, "My God, you're infected," I think. And I am dying to know what they have encountered. You're contaminated, both of you. I am dying to know what they've seen and what that means, because there's a tone to it that feels like he has seen this before and they have developed a specific word for it because of how frequent it's been. And we don't get anything from that. So Nassun goes out into, after this like horrific bloody attack that almost ends in these guardians dying because they're being, they're outnumbered, but they wind up actually managing to kill all of the Imperial orogenes. She walks out and runs into a girl who asks if she's like the newbie that's here. And she says, "Did they break your hands yet? Did they break your hand yet?" Nassun's breath stops in her throat. Nassun can't think. The sound of Shafa's fist crushing bones echoes in her head. Did they break your hand yet? This place, this fulcrum, is why her mother broke her hand. Are you sure you can control yourself? She sees again the rock in her mother's hand, rising, holding a moment, falling. The fulcrum is why her mother never loved her, is why her father does not love her anymore, is why her brother is dead. Obviously she's wrong. Her mother loves her desperately. She's not understanding this completely, but she's not wrong in the fulcrum being a horrible place meant to oppress and ruin people. So, this is horrific. These people who have no right to exist. The sapphire isn't far off, hovering over Jeketi. She cesses it. Instinctively, she turned to face it. She doesn't need eyes or orogeny to use it. There are so many silver threads in this place. The orogenes are all connected through practice together, shared experience. Did they break your hand? It is over in the span of 3 breaths. Then Nassun lets herself fall out of the watery blue and stands shaking in its wake. Some while later, Nassun turns and sees Shafa standing in front of her with Umber. They weren't supposed to be here, she blurts. You said. Shafa isn't smiling and is still in a way that Nassun knows too well. Did you do this to help us then? This place was wrong, she said. The fulcrum is wrong. This place made Mama something else. This place made her wrong. Shafa looks at Umber. Umber tilts his head, and for an instant there is a flicker in the silver between them. The things lodged in their Cecipine resonate in a strange way, but then Shafa frowns, and she sees him push back against the silver. It hurts him to do this, but he does it anyway. I think you may be right, little one, is all he says. It follows. Put people in a cage, and they will devote themselves to escaping it, not cooperating with those who caged them. What happened here was inevitable. Still, their guardians must have been very lax to let a group of orogenes get the drop on them. That one with the blowgun, born feral, most likely, and taught things she shouldn't have been before being brought here. Lax guardians, says Umber, watching Shafa. Yes. Well, so Umber really wants Shafa to kill Nassun, and Shafa's not doing it. And Umber is low-key waiting for his chance to kill her on his own, and Shafa winds up having to, stay awake for practically a week straight in order to keep her safe. But it's clear Umber is, not entirely on board with whatever it is that Shafa has decided here, and I don't know if Umber is even totally aware of why Shafa's made the decision that he has. So they wind up getting back on the road again, because I guess they're going to find another fulcrum. I think that they're searching for more. I'm not even sure what they're on the road for now, or maybe they're going back home. But Nassun is kind of like fucked up over the fact that Shafa is like kind of, he has suffered a loss of respect because of choosing to keep her alive, and she feels kind of responsible for that. And she asks him finally, like, why are you the way you are? Who put that thing in your head? Why did this like, who did this first? And he tries to think back, and he just doesn't know or understand himself. And finally has to try and be like, look, this is just how I am. Who was the first origin, and why are you the way you are? I mean, we just kind of have to accept what we are. So she's laying there thinking about this when he finally falls asleep. And she's actually awake, so she's not in danger at the moment. And she sees this sudden appearance of this statue, which I think is the same one that Essun just talked to. This one is entirely gray, even to the whites of his eyes. And he tells her, so you're the one that stoned the fulcrum. He knows exactly who she is and what she did. And he says, I want to express my admiration for your work. Why did you stone them? She says, they were wrong. You were wrong, he says. The people of the fulcrum are not to blame for the things they do. You wanted to know why your guardian must suffer as he does. The answer is he doesn't have to. The Stone Eater's head turns towards him. There's a flicker of something, an adjustment too infinitely fine to see or cess, and suddenly the alive, vicious throb of silver within Shafa dies into silence. Only that dark needle-like blot in his Hesapine remains active, and immediately Nassun senses its effort to reassert control. For the moment, though, Shafa exhales softly and relaxes further into sleep. The pain that has been grinding at him for days is gone for now. I can teach you how to fight his tormentor, his master, if you wish. In exchange for what? She asks, very intelligently, and he says, nothing. If you fight his master, then you fight my enemy too, and it makes us allies. And she agrees, asks his name. He tells her he doesn't really have one, and she can call him what she wants, and she decides on the word steel. And then he disappears, and Umber is standing there. And she tells him, I'll kill you if you try anything. You know that, right? Umber says, I know you'll try. And she's like, no, I'll try and I'll do it. And he says, you don't even know how dangerous you are. Far, far more than me. She doesn't, and that bothers her a lot. Umber does not act out of cruelty. If he sees her as a threat, there must be some reason for it, but it doesn't matter. Shafa wants me alive, so I live, even if I have to kill you. And she can tell that there's something going on with inside Umber where he's sort of like conversing with the thing inside him. And he says, and if Shafa decides you should die, then I die. Then I will trust in your love for him, he says. For an instant there is an echo in his voice, reverberating through the ground. For now. With that, he moves past her and sits down near Shafa, assuming a guard stance himself. And Nassun kind of looks at him, but she knows that the guardians don't really lie. So if he says this, then he is willing to sort of be at peace for a little while. Night falls. The evening is clear, apart from the faint haze of ash blowing up from the north, and a few broken pearled clouds that periodically drift southward along the breeze. And we get another little like insight. Journal of Journeywoman Fogrid Innovator Eumenes. And she's talking about how there was a mural she found where there was something real weird in the sky of this mural. And she didn't like it and had one of the orogenes, the black jacket, crumble the mural away. So, yeah. It is a real... there is so much going on, you guys. I am glad that I underread a little bit because I'm still over time talking about it all. But anyway, I'm going to go. Thank you all so, so much for listening. Jason, wherever you're at, buddy, I hope that you were able to hang out with us today and listen to this somehow. And I hope that you guys all are enjoying the show. Until next time. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.